Hello guys and welcome to JavaFX tutorial for beginners from Genius Coders. So in this video we will see how we can use the JavaFX CSS syntax in our application or how we can apply this. So in previous video I have shown you how we can create the CSS file. So in CSS we can add the syntax, some syntax are there. Firstly I want to apply the CSS on button. So in button you can see here we have already added the CSS file, and in CSS style sheet, after style sheet we have one text field with label ID. So web CSS, like we can give the ID for CSS. So we can use this ID in our CSS file. So let's check. Give the ID bdn and save. Now when we use the ID we need to use the hash and ID. Save this. So our first syntax is how we can change the color of text. So dash fx dash text fill colon. You can see here the automatically suggestion are appeared. Let's check. Or you can also give the hash code of color. Now let's check. So you can see here the text field of our button color is changed. You can see here the CSS text field. So this way you can apply the CSS using ID. So consider if you don't want to give the ID but you have the FX ID. You have one FX ID and you want to use this FX ID as in your CSS file. So let's give the FX ID button and go to your CSS file, change this button. Now check. So you can see here the changes are applied. So these two ways you can add your CSS with your FX ID and CSS ID. But in case you don't want to use the ID and also you don't want to use the FX ID, so in this situation you can use the default ID. Like if you want to apply the CSS on button, then you can use the dot or component name button. Now check. CSS is applied. You can see you change the color now, so we can differentiate. CCC. Check it. You can see here the color is changed, means our CSS is applied on this. So these three ways you can apply the CSS on our components, or we can also apply the CSS on anchor pane. Okay. So this is our first syntax. Now next syntax is the change the background color. Change the color of background. Change the background color. FX background color and give the color name hash f. See the result. Okay, so results, the CSS is applied. And check color also. You can check here properties, text field 333 applied. So now our next syntax is add the padding in our button. So for padding, fx dash padding colon. So our first value for top left, bottom, right, and semicolon. Now check. Okay, just and so change this. Now we can apply the CSS. Okay, so you can see the differences. In right side we have given the 100 padding, so it's moved to the right side. Okay. So our next syntax is for our background radius. fx -fx dot background radius 10 10 0 10. We can see here the result. It's goes to round. So this actually this background radius is for rounded button. You can see here it's not changed because we have given the 0. Top left, top left, top right, bottom left, and bottom right. Okay, so this way you can apply the CSS using this common syntax. So now move to the next, how we can apply the CSS when button is hovered or armed. Okay, so for this use the default ID button colon hover. Now I want to, when the button is hovered, I want to change the background color. So for this fx background color colon #3 and change the text field #FF semicolon. Now check and see here the CSS is applied. So we can apply the CSS for hover, or also we can apply the CSS on button when it's press button colon press. When it press, change the padding 10 15 13 13 15 colon. So check, you can see here the changes in button. When we click on it's go to small amount of upper. So let's move on and see the next of our syntax. So our next syntax is change the border color, or we can change the border width, height. So let's border color hash F4 semicolon. Check, you can see here the small amount of border is appear. So now change the width of border. Fix border width and px save. Border width is change. Okay, so this way we can use the CSS on our components. We have seen one component, but we can apply the CSS on other components also, but it's not possible to see all the components. So a small demo of the JavaFX CSS. So in next video we will create one login page with CSS. So see you in next video guys.